cornbread dressing, creamed onions, and sweet raisin rice pudding. Humble dishes with big memories. They didn't need fancy ingredients, just cast iron skillets, chipped bowls, and hands that knew what comfort tasted like. These are 25 forgotten side dishes you could only learn from Grandma. And in the next few minutes, you're going to remember why they're worth bringing back. Tomato gravy and biscuits. Before store-bought mixes and frozen breakfast took over, there was tomato gravy, rich, creamy, and just tangy enough to wake up the taste buds. It started with basic pantry, flour browned in bacon drippings or lard, milk whisked slowly, and a handful of canned or stewed tomatoes added until the whole pot turned a rosy hue. Poured hot over fresh from the oven biscuits, it wasn't just breakfast, it was tradition. The gravy was often thick enough to hold a spoon upright, speckled with black pepper, and sometimes sweetened with a pinch of sugar, depending on the hand stirring the pot. No one needed sausage or eggs when there was a plate piled high with this. Back then, tomato gravy wasn't just a dish, it was the heart of a southern morning, made with whatever was left in the cupboard and served with whatever warmth was left in the house. Baked apples with raisins and cinnamon. Simple, warm, and sweet baked apples were a dessert made for hard times and full bellies. Each apple was cored and packed with raisins, brown sugar, and cinnamon, then baked until soft and bubbling in its own syrupy juices. No crust, no fuss, just a spoon and a plate. This side dish sat proudly next to roast pork, turned up at church suppers, and made humble weeknights feel a bit more special. It didn't ask for much. Just a few apples from the barrel, a scoop of sugar, and that jar of cinnamon every kitchen seemed to have tucked away. The smell alone could bring a whole house to the table, warm, spiced, and inviting. When fresh fruit was scarce, or pies too labor-intensive, baked apples filled the gap. Today, with pre-packaged pastries and sugar-laden treats filling store aisles, these have mostly disappeared from the menu. Canned chili over saltines. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. A can of chili heated on the stove, ladled over a plate of saltine crackers. Crunchy, salty, and soft all at once. No recipe needed. Just whatever you had left in the cupboard and the time it took to turn the burner on. This side dish was more than a meal hack. It was survival. Families turned to it when groceries were low and dinner needed to happen fast. Saltines stretched the chili, soaked up the sauce, and somehow made a littlekin feel like enough. If there was cheese, it went on top. If there were onions, they got chopped. Forget Instagram presentations. This was food that showed up when you needed it most. It filled stomachs, warmed the kitchen, and asked for nothing but a can opener and a plate. These days, it's seen as too simple, too poor, too plain. Jelly roll-ups on white bread. No baking, no stovetop, no fuss. Just a slice of white bread rolled flat, spread edge to edge with jelly, then curled into a tight little pinwheel and sliced in half. That was the whole recipe. And somehow, it was enough. You'd find them packed into lunchboxes, handed out after school, or made in a flash when money was tight and appetites were big. The bread gave it bulk, the jelly added sweetness, and the whole thing came together in under a minute. Grapes, strawberries, apples, whatever was in the fridge got the job done. This forgotten side dish was a favorite because it didn't pretend to be more than it was. It was simple, sweet, and satisfying. But as processed snacks and shiny wrappers took over, jelly roll-ups quietly disappeared. Apple ring pancakes. Breakfast didn't always come from a box or a drive-through window. Sometimes it came from a skillet and a single apple. Thick slices were cut into rings, dipped in pancake batter, and fried until golden and fluffy, with sweet fruit in the middle of every bite. This was the kind of side dish that turned Sunday breakfast into something special. No syrups or toppings needed, just a little powdered sugar, maybe a dab of butter. It was fast, frugal, and didn't waste a thing. Bruised apples? Perfect. Leftover batter? Even better. Before toaster waffles and sugary cereals became the norm, meals like this were how the day started. They didn't cost much and didn't take long, but they left you full and smiling. Apple ring pancakes were dessert and breakfast all in one, and they disappeared the moment convenience food took over. Cornmeal mush. Cornmeal mush was one of those meals that didn't need a recipe. Just muscle, patience, and whatever was left in the pantry. A big pot, some salted water, and a slow pour of cornmeal while stirring constantly. That was the heart of it. It thickened into a warm porridge that could be served fresh and hot, often with a splash of milk or a drizzle of molasses. But the real magic happened the next day. Once cooled, it firmed into a loaf easy to slice and pan fry in a bit of lard or bacon grease. The outside crisped up golden brown, while the inside stayed soft and creamy. It went with everything: beans, greens, eggs, syrup, whatever was on hand. Families could stretch one sack of cornmeal across weeks. It didn't spoil, didn't cost much, and filled you right up. On hard days, it might be the only thing on the plate, and nobody complained. It was breakfast, dinner, or even a late-night snack. Always served hot and made with care. Cornmeal mush wasn't flashy, but it got the job done. And back then, that was what counted most. Mock apple pie, made with crackers. Mock apple pie was born out of necessity. No apples, no problem. A stack of saltine crackers, some sugar, cinnamon, and a splash of lemon juice created a filling that fooled more than a few folks. The crackers softened as they baked, soaking in the syrup and spices until they mimicked the texture of cooked apples. You'd start with a basic pie crust, usually homemade, flaky, and buttery. The apples were made by layering broken saltines in the shell, then pouring over a hot mixture of water, sugar, cream of tartar, and cinnamon. Add a few drops of lemon juice or even vinegar, and it suddenly smelled like fall. Once baked, the top crust turned golden and crisp, and the whole thing came out bubbling, aromatic, and convincing enough to pass for the real thing at first bite. Some even swore it tasted better. During the Great Depression and wartime rationing, this clever trick became a kitchen staple. It used what was available, made do without complaint, and still brought dessert to the table when nothing else could. Soft-boiled eggs with buttered soldiers. Mornings moved fast, but there was still time for something warm. Soft-boiled eggs with buttered soldiers were the breakfast that filled you up without slowing you down. The eggs were boiled just long enough to set the whites, leaving the yolks golden and runny, ready for dipping. Toast was sliced into neat strips, thin enough to dunk, thick enough to hold. Buttered while hot, the bread soaked up every drop of yolk like it was meant for it. No forks, no knives, just fingers and a little ceramic egg cup. The eggs were timed by instinct, not by gadgets. A gentle tap on the shell, a careful crack of the top, and breakfast was served. It didn't take much, just eggs, bread, and butter, but it had a way of making the morning feel more civilized. This wasn't a rushed meal, it was a ritual. Perfect for school days, busy Sundays, or those quiet, chilly mornings when the stove was already warm. The kind of dish that didn't need explaining, it just needed eating. Mayonnaise and pineapple salad. This might raise eyebrows today, but back then, this sweet and tangy salad turned up at every church potluck, Sunday dinner, or family picnic. One thick slice of canned pineapple went on a piece of iceberg lettuce, topped with a generous spoonful of mayonnaise, a sprinkle of shredded cheddar cheese, and if it was a special occasion, a bright red maraschino cherry right on top. The combination of sweet pineapple, creamy mayo, and salty cheddar might sound unusual now, but it just worked. The cheese cut through the sweetness, the mayo added richness, and the pineapple brought that bright, juicy bite that kept it refreshing. It didn't need a long ingredient list or a hot oven. You could open a few cans, do a little grating, and have a whole tray ready in minutes. It was one of those sides that dressed up the table without much effort and added a little color next to a ham roast or meatloaf. For many, this wasn't just a salad, it was a piece of nostalgia in every bite. Simple, striking, and oddly satisfying, it's one of those forgotten side dishes that deserves a second glance. Leftover rice with creamed spinach. Leftover rice never went to waste in kitchens that knew how to stretch a meal. One of the most filling and surprisingly comforting ways to use it was mixing it with creamed spinach. A quick fix made from canned or frozen spinach, warmed in a pot with milk, salt, and a bit of butter or cheese. Once the spinach mixture thickened slightly, the cold rice was stirred in, absorbing the creaminess and softening into a dish that was more satisfying than it had any right to be. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot, hearty, and felt like something more than the sum of its parts. Some cooks added a pinch of nutmeg or garlic powder. Others, when eggs were around, would crack one in and stir until it cooked through, adding extra protein and richness. It was a dish that changed depending on the pantry, but the bones of it stayed the same. Leftover rice, warm milk, leafy greens, and whatever else was hanging around. When dinner time rolled in with no clear plan and a bare fridge, this was the kind of side that came together fast, filled a plate, and made sure no one left the table hungry. Rice and raisin pudding. Back then, a pot of leftover rice didn't get tossed. It got transformed. Rice and raisin pudding was the kind of sweet fix you could whip up with scraps, and it never failed to comfort. You'd take cold cooked rice, pour in some milk, fresh or evaporated, add sugar, a handful of raisins, and stir it all gently over low heat. As it warmed, the raisins plumped, the milk thickened, and the rice softened again, soaking in all the sweetness. It didn't take long, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15 if the stove was fussy. If there was a cinnamon stick or a dash of vanilla, even better. But it worked just fine without. This dish showed up as breakfast when eggs were scarce, or as dessert when there wasn't anything else. It didn't need baking or fancy prep, just a little heat and time. Some folks liked it soupy. Others let it simmer longer for a thicker, spoonable pudding. It was warm, easy on the stomach, and gave kids something sweet without dipping into the grocery budget. Forgotten by most, but for families who lived through lean times, rice and raisin pudding was one of those comforting, vintage side dishes that quietly carried joy to the table, just the kind only Grandma could teach. Tomato eggdrop soup. This wasn't a meal that needed fanfare. It was the soup you made when the pantry was nearly empty, but you still needed something warm and filling. Tomato eggdrop soup started with broth, chicken, beef, or even just water with a bouillon cube stirred in. Add in a can of tomatoes, juice and all, and let it bubble on the stovetop. Once it reaches a steady simmer, you'd crack a couple of eggs into a bowl, whisk them gently, and then pour them into the pot slowly, stirring in wide circles. The eggs cooked instantly, turning into soft, silky ribbons floating through the broth. Some added a dash of pepper or chopped herbs if they had them, but that wasn't necessary. The broth was tangy from the tomatoes, hearty from the eggs, and just enough to fill a belly after a long day. It came together in 10 minutes or less, and it didn't require anything you wouldn't already have tucked in a cabinet somewhere. In homes where groceries had to stretch, this soup was more than a recipe. It was a lifesaver, warming cold hands and quieting hungry mouths. Peanut butter and honey milkshakes. No fancy blenders, no protein powder, just peanut butter, milk, and honey. That was enough to make a breakfast that stuck with you until lunch. You'd spoon the peanut butter into a glass jar or cup, drizzle in honey, and pour over cold milk. Stir it fast with a fork, or give it a shake in a mason jar if you have one. If there was a banana on the counter or ice cubes in the tray, those might get tossed in too. But even without extras, this was thick, sweet, and filled you up like a meal. It had protein, energy, and sweetness. Everything needed to get through a school day or shift at the mill. It wasn't made for show. It didn't need measuring cups or timing. Just pantry staples, a quick mix, and you had breakfast in minutes. It went down easy and didn't leave a mess behind. Back then, this kind of shake was a mother's secret weapon, especially for teenagers who wouldn't sit for breakfast. It didn't cost much, didn't take long, and somehow managed to feel like a treat. Cold spaghetti with Italian dressing. When supper leftovers met a hot day, cold spaghetti with Italian dressing showed up. It wasn't fancy, but it was one of those smart little dishes that turned last night's noodles into something fresh and new without touching the stove. You'd rinse off the spaghetti, toss it into a big bowl, and drizzle on bottled Italian dressing, zesty, herby, and tangy. Whatever was left in the fridge might go in too. Chopped bell peppers, sliced olives, onions, maybe some shredded cheese. It depended on what was on hand and what needed using up. Give it a good toss and let it chill for a few minutes, and suddenly it becomes a whole new meal. This side dish worked great for lunchboxes, hot afternoons, or potlucks where you didn't want to bring something fussy. It was light, cool, and just filling enough to hold you over. Today it might be called a pasta salad, but back then it was just a smart way to not waste food. It made the most out of what you had with zero effort, and somehow always tasted better the next day. Spam and egg scramble. When you opened a can of Spam, you knew dinner would be on the table in 10 minutes flat. Cubed up and tossed into a hot skillet, it browned fast, turning crispy on the edges while staying soft in the middle. Crack in a few eggs, add some diced onion if it was around, and you had a meal that was salty, savory, and filling. This scramble didn't need seasoning. Spam had plenty. It was the kind of meal you made when groceries were running low, but mouths still needed feeding. It filled a plate, filled a belly, and didn't leave dirty pans behind. Sometimes it got served with toast or wrapped in a slice of white bread like a sandwich. Other times, it was eaten straight from the pan. Either way, it felt like something real, even when the ingredients came from a can. Spam might not be glamorous now, but back then it was gold in a tin. Shelf-stable, affordable, and always ready to turn into dinner. This simple scramble proved you didn't need much to make something that felt whole. Egg in a hole. Egg in a hole went by a dozen names depending on the kitchen you were standing in. Some called it toad in the hole. Others said sunshine toast. But every version meant the same thing: breakfast that felt a little special without costing a dime extra. You started with a slice of sandwich bread, usually white, and cut out a circle from the center using a glass or the rim of a jar. Into the skillet, it went with a dab of butter, toasted just enough to crisp the edges. Then you'd crack an egg into that hole, letting it fry up right inside the bread. The yolk stayed soft if you timed it right, perfect for sopping up with the crust. It was warm, golden, and ready in 5 minutes flat. No extra dishes, no waste. Sometimes there was a little sprinkle of pepper or a dusting of salt. If there was time, the circle cut from the center got toasted too and served right on top like a lid. It was a breakfast born out of thrift and time saving, but it still felt like a treat, even on the busiest school mornings. Fried cornmeal mush. After a pot of cornmeal mush had done its duty, there was always a bit left over. And that's where fried cornmeal mush came in, a second-day side dish that proved nothing ever went to waste. Once the hot porridge cooled, it stiffened into a firm loaf you could slice like bread. Those golden slabs were dropped into a hot skillet with bacon grease or lard, frying until the edges turned crisp and the center stayed soft and creamy. You'd hear that sizzle as it hit the pan, and the smell would drift through the house, dragging sleepy feet toward the kitchen. Some folks poured molasses on top. Others added a fried egg or a spoonful of beans. It worked at breakfast, lunch, or supper, and made the most of a single sack of cornmeal. There wasn't a need for fresh ingredients or a big grocery list. Just yesterday's leftovers, a skillet, and the kind of know-how that comes from doing a lot with very little. Fried cornmeal mush wasn't just any side. It was one of those forgotten dishes that stretched a tight budget and turned kitchen scraps into something worth remembering, straight from Grandma's table. Barbecued pork kidneys. Back when barbecues were more than burgers and brats, pork kidneys had their place right on the fire, marinated, skewered, and grilled until smoky and tender. Sure, they weren't for the faint of heart, but for folks who grew up with nose-to-tail cooking, kidneys were just another part of the feast. First came the prep, sliced and soaked to tame the strong flavor, then marinated in vinegar, garlic, maybe a little mustard or hot sauce, depending on who was doing the cooking. They hit the grill over an open flame and needed careful timing. Too long, and they'd toughen. Just right, and they stayed juicy with a little char on the outside. Served hot off the fire, sometimes with a bold barbecue sauce or spicy relish. These were bites that packed real depth. They weren't meant to be dainty. They were bold, earthy, and made with care. Canned chicken hash. Chicken hash from a can didn't look like much, but it sure cooked up into something worth remembering. It was pantry cooking at its best. A one-skillet dinner that pulled flavor from almost nothing. You'd open a can of shredded chicken, drain it, and throw it into a hot pan with diced onions and chopped up potatoes. Leftover if you had them, raw if you didn't. A little butter or bacon grease helped it all brown, and if you were lucky, the bottom crisped just right, giving you that golden layer that stuck to the pan just enough. Sometimes it got salt and pepper. If there was garlic or a spice jar in reach, that too. But most times the ingredients spoke for themselves, meaty, starchy, and just enough to fill everyone's plate. This hash came together fast and worked hard, feeding a table with nothing fresh in sight. It was the kind of supper you'd make on a Thursday night with payday still 2 days off. Not glamorous, not pretty, but real, hot and full of comfort. Raisin bran with warm milk and butter. Before the age of cartoon cereal boxes and plastic toys inside, breakfast came in a bowl that smelled like comfort. Raisin bran with warm milk and butter was one of those winter staples, simple, filling, and just sweet enough to start the day. You'd pour bran flakes into a big ceramic bowl, then heat milk on the stove until it steamed. A scoop of butter, just enough to melt and spread its richness, went in next. Then came the sprinkle of brown sugar or a pinch of cinnamon, if the pantry had any to spare. The hot milk softened the flakes just enough while the raisins plumped and sweetened every bite. It wasn't fancy, but it warmed you from the inside out. For cold mornings when chores waited or snow piled at the door, this breakfast was fuel for whatever came next. It took 5 minutes to make and left behind a bowl that felt more like a hug than a meal. It wasn't about trends or packaging, just practical, reliable food that made the most out of every bite. Smoked turkey necks and stew. Smoked turkey necks didn't sit pretty on a plate, but they had a way of bringing deep, rich flavor to a stew like nothing else could. Back when nothing got thrown away, these overlooked cuts were slowly simmered into magic. You'd rinse them off, drop them into a pot with beans, greens, or root vegetables, whatever the pantry had, and let them bubble all afternoon. The smoke from the meat seeped into the broth, adding a depth you couldn't get from bouillon or spice jars. The meat itself was tender, falling off the bone if you gave it time. This wasn't a quick-fix meal. It was a Sunday kind of dish, where the pot simmered low and slow while the rest of the day went on. Some folks added hot sauce or cornbread on the side. Others just ladled it into deep bowls and called it dinner. This forgotten side dish of smoked turkey neck stew was proof that real flavor didn't come from price. It came from patience, skill, and the kind of old-fashioned know-how only Grandma's kitchen could teach. Pork cracklins. Back then, no part of the pig went unused, and that included the skin. Pork cracklins were the crunchy reward after a long day of butchering, made by frying the skin and bits of fat until they turned golden, puffed, and full of flavor. It started with trimming down thick slabs of pigskin, often with a little fat still clinging on. Into the pot they went, rendered slowly until the fat melted down and the skin crisped up. The result was loud, salty, and completely addicting. Some folks tossed them with a dash of salt or red pepper. Others stirred them into cornbread batter or crumbled them over beans and greens for an extra bite. They weren't just snacks, they were survival cooking. Crunchy reminders that you honored the whole animal, not just the pretty cuts. You'd find them at gatherings, in lunch pails, and always hidden in a kitchen tin where fingers weren't supposed to sneak. Whole hog barbecue. If ever there was a side dish that turned into a celebration, it was whole hog barbecue. Not a slice, not a cut, the whole pig, roasted low and slow over wood coals, seasoned from snout to tail with whatever dry rub the cook swore by. It started before sunrise, with a pit dug and wood fired down to glowing embers. The pig butterflied and brined or rubbed the night before, was laid across a grate and cooked for hours. Not rushed, never rushed. This was a process that demanded patience and attention. The skin crackled into golden armor. The meat beneath stayed juicy, smoky, and seasoned through every layer. As the hours passed, folks gathered, kids ran, coffee brewed, and the smell hung heavy in the air like a promise. Side dishes came out, slaw, beans, bread, and once the hog was ready, meat was carved right off the bone. Smoked buffalo. Smoked buffalo wasn't your everyday table meat. It was lean, tough if mishandled, and carried the wild taste of the plains. But if you knew what you were doing, you could turn it into something remarkable. The key was in the slow smoke. Buffalo cuts were rubbed with spice blends, usually paprika, garlic, salt, and a hint of brown sugar, then set over wood chips and left to smoke low and slow. No shortcuts. The meat softened over hours, picking up deep flavor and holding onto its rugged texture without drying out. You didn't drown it in sauce. You respected it. Served sliced on a wooden cutting board or shredded over beans and potatoes, it was hearty and honest, a dish that didn't pretend to be anything else. Buffalo was a meat you ate with intention, usually on special occasions or when someone got lucky with a good cut. It was a vintage side dish, born from old traditions, frontier spirit, and the kind of cooking only Grandma knew by heart. Potato candy. Sounds strange until you've tried it. Potato candy was the Depression-era treat that made sugar stretch, and smiles last longer than the ingredients list suggested. One single mashed potato, left over and cooled, was all you needed to start. You'd stir in powdered sugar, cup after cup, until it turned from mash to dough. The texture was soft and stiff, like sugar clay. That dough got rolled out into a sheet, spread with a thick layer of peanut butter, and rolled up tight like a jelly roll. Sliced into pinwheels, it looked like something from a bakery case. No baking, no eggs, no butter, just sugar, peanut butter, and 1 spoon of leftover spuds. It was rich, sweet, and perfect for holidays, Sunday tables, or just whenever a little sweet was needed. But the cupboard was bare. Kids loved it. Adults marveled at it, and nobody believed it came from a potato. These forgotten side dishes might not be on today's menus, but they still hold the kind of heart you can only learn from Grandma's kitchen. If you enjoyed this trip through vintage flavor and frugal genius, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around for more.